It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dog strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. W.E.B. Du Bois. Hello, it is I, the one without an upload schedule. After months of class, work, substance abuse, and burnout, I'm half kidding. I'm fine. I'm once again back from the dead to learn you something. How was your day? Is it going well? I hope so. Unless you're not subscribed, then I hope your day is shit. If you're new here, I'm the Minority for now, more on that later, and I discuss things to do with blackness in America. One of the most notable concepts having to do with black identity is double consciousness. If you know nothing about the concept, my goal is to give you a flawless, like me, understanding of the topic by the end of this video. In 1903, Du Bois used the term to describe a sense of two-ness black Americans felt living in white America, and it is the crux of today's topic, code switching and black identity. We're going to talk about how that two-ness is still enforced today, both systemically and socially, and what can be done to eliminate it. This video will deal a lot with black identity, racial performance, and language, so I'm really excited to share it with you. Code switching is something I've been wanting to talk about since having this channel, but I didn't really feel like I could do the topic justice until recently. There are many videos on the topic of code switching, but mine, as always, will be the best. You're in for a treat, or a very rude awakening. Either way, you'll want wine. If you haven't already, watch my latest video, How the South Kept Slavery, after you watch this, of course, and check out my Patreon if you're feeling extra generous. Anyway, on to the show. I was trying to solicit support for a study of attitudes of potential employers toward black speech. This white research man contended that such a study would only prove the obvious, since everybody knew you had to speak the King's English to get ahead in America. With my research proposal thus dismissed, I started to leave. As I did so, the research division head turned to his assistant and said, "Listen, can you stay here a few minutes? You and me have some work to do." Now, me being me, I had to correct my man's bad grammar. I said, "Hey, watch your dialect. It's you and I have some work to do." "Hi, did you get your wine?" "Get your wine, if you're 21 and up. Or other things, if you want those. I don't know what you do. Where was I? As I was saying, in 1903, Du Bois coined the term double consciousness to describe a sense of two-ness black Americans felt living in white America. The term actually comes from the mental disorder split personality. Du Bois believed racial segregation had produced a similar metaphorical disorder in black people, a racial schizophrenia, so to speak. He also described a longing for these two sides to merge and become one. When discussing what this looked like today, I think language is a good place to start. The issue of bias towards the language use of black people has been something dealt with outside of America as well. South Africa, for example, had many issues between their two major languages, Afrikaans and English. Their conflict would lead to what's been called the Soweto Uprisings. What began as a protest by thousands, mostly students, against the government's insistence that the Afrikaans language, a language used by the white minority that ruled South Africa, be used as a medium of instruction in Soweto high schools, which served black Africans. It is estimated that when a police and army responded to demonstrators by firing tear gas and then bullets, between 400 and 700 people, many of them children, were killed. This was followed by a cycle of protests and repression across the country. So just a bit of context, South Africa had a long-standing policy of apartheid, which called for racial and economic discrimination against non-whites in the country. Furthermore, the issue of language was a sensitive one. Black Africans demanded the recognition of their own languages and cultures. This conflict between English and Afrikaans speakers goes to the heart of the history of white South Africa. The original European settlers in 1652 spoke Dutch, which eventually evolved into Afrikaans. But in 1822, the British gained control and proclaimed English as the language of the schools, churches, and government. Another example of this is in the Dominican Republic in 1937. Their president wanted to ethnically cleanse their country of Haitians, and he is said to have asked those carrying out his orders to use linguistic tests to identify them. Soldiers carried around sprigs of parsley around with them, asked confused civilians to tell them what it was, and if they pronounced a French R, they were shot dead on the assumption that they were Haitian. And this became to be known as the Parsley Massacre. I mention all this to say this issue of language goes far beyond America because racism is global. A1 analysis for anti-minority. Anyway, back to America. So if you don't know, code switching is basically changing your language or dialect to fit a certain setting. And today we're going to be looking at arguments for and against code switching. Code switching is a technique learned by many black people when entering education, but it is also something you can pick up on your own. In the classroom, many teachers today focus on teaching the differences between AAVE and standard English, and teaching students to mostly use standard. So as a result, in going through education with AAVE being taught as the incorrect way to teach things, or at least as I was when I was going through, many of us developed a double tongue, so to speak. That sounds weird, but we're going with it. Anyway, one tongue for speaking AAVE and one tongue for speaking standard English. But it wasn't always this way. AAVE wasn't recognized as a dialect in classrooms or in education in general until around 1996 with the Oakland Unified School District. The board made clear it will recognize a dialect used at home by many of its students and deploy it in its classroom to help students learn better. And this mostly was going to be through translating the sentences. And apparently this recognition of AAVE in general pissed a lot of people off. A widespread assumption was that it was political correctness gone mad, where a clearly substandard form of the language was being elevated simply because it was used by black people. The move was condemned as dumbing down and depriving black students the means by which to improve themselves. It was criticized by both pundits black and white, notably Jesse Jackson and Maya Angelou. Jackson has said, while we are fighting in California trying to extend affirmative action and fighting to teach our children so they become more qualified for jobs in Oakland, some madness has erupted over making slang talk a second language. You don't have to go to school to learn to talk garbage. Maya Angelou also weighed in saying, I'm incensed. The very idea that African American language is a language separate and apart is very threatening, because it could encourage young men and women not to learn standard English. From what I'm getting, a lot of this resistance to this decision was out of fear that black people would give up the standard, and this would lead to making job prospects harder. But Oakland did get support from many linguists when making this decision. In response to Oakland's decision, the Linguistic Society of America said in 1997, the systemic and expressive nature of grammar and pronunciation patterns of African American vernacular has been established by numerous scientific studies over the past 30 years. Characterizations of Ebonics as slang, mutant, lazy, defective, ungrammatical, or broken English are incorrect and demeaning. Not only that, there's evidence from the US, Sweden, and other countries that using AAVE in a classroom can help students understand and pick up standard English faster. From this perspective, the Oakland School Board's decision to recognize the vernacular of African American students and teaching them standard English is linguistically and pedagogically sound. But unfortunately, we still will deal with these bad assumptions about AAVE. There's much debate around the validity of code switching and the implications you give people when doing so. So around many black linguist circles, people are asking, to switch or not to switch? That is the question. I'm sorry. The argument for code switching for many black linguists is to say AAVE and standard English are equal. Each has their prestige in their respective separate settings. However, this argument that they are equal doesn't really hold up when the two meet in the public domain or meet in formal settings. Since black English is restricted in school and mainstream public, it is in effect rendered inferior. So what's the point of acknowledging the complexities of a dialect and the validity of it if you were still going to teach its users to not use it, to develop a duality? Tony Cook, a member of the Oakland School Board, personifies this paradox pretty well in this interview. In an interview after the Oakland School Board's decision, Cook was asked, why don't children automatically know standard English, since they hear it all the time on television and at school? She responded, African Americans whose economic status and exposure is closer to that of the Huxtables have the exposure to work with the youngsters and teach them about the two-ness of the world they are involved in. But some schools are located in very depressed areas, have a primary population of African Americans on a fixed income. They see very little, the young people are exposed to very little, and there isn't a whole lot of reason in the home, this is just my guess, to adopt a behavior of duality. Problem being, this is the issue to begin with and adds to the double consciousness. Instead of attacking the racism behind the domination of standard English, they teach their black students to just cope with it, to assimilate. Returning to our original question, to switch or not to switch, the case for code switching is, code switching allows easier access to professional settings where their wage masters, employers, would look down upon those who do not speak in the standard, like Jesse Jackson. And the same can be said about academia. In fact, current research suggests that the racial achievement gap in literacy learning is likely more caused by teachers' lack of acceptance of AAVE than by bi-dialectal students' confusion over features of standard English and AAVE. There have also been several studies that documented that teachers There have been many studies that document teachers believing that AAVE is ungrammatical, lazy, unintelligent. All my sources are linked in the description, by the way. So, while using the standard could mean better grades and more respect from employers, those benefits seem to be coming from the degradation of AAVE. So, what do? Well, there's been a middle ground put forth. In an argument against code switching by Vershawn Ashanti Young, code meshing is offered as an alternative. The opposing stakes of the minority language debate have remained constant since the 1974, when they were most notably carved out in the well-known resolution on the students' right to their own language, or STRO. That resolution reaffirms students' rights to their own dialect that expresses their family, community identity. Thus, those who support this resolution promote students' expression of their diverse dialects, while others argue that students' futures are put at risk unless they learn accepted forms of language performance. This debate has continued because code switching has been accepted by both sides, basically. However, the very logic of code switching contradicts the very issue that sparked this debate in the first place: the legitimate use of so-called non-standard English dialects. The major contradiction that code switching presents to Stroll is summarized by Allen and Smith. Commenting on the inconsistency he observed among those supporting the Stroll at the English conference he attended, he writes, "The conference opened with an amusing and thoughtful statement by Robert Hogan, who advocated students' right to their own language. His keynote address was followed by a panel which concerned itself with how and when do we change students from his own dialect to English." Smith pointed out that the panel's goal was basically contradicting with the entire panel's opening statement. For him, as the title implies, no one has a right to his own language. This does not mean what some supporters of code switching might think it to mean, that teaching standard English poses no threat to students' dialects and identities, since they have no fundamental claim to them in regard to the project of schooling, which is to change everybody's language. For Smith, it doesn't mean a change from home dialect to standard English, since according to him, there is no such thing. The very concept of standard English, he says, is mythical. No body of men and no computer can survey, analyze, and synthesize the speaking and writing of over 2 million delightfully varied American citizens. By way of elaboration, he adds that there is no textbook or grammar which does in fact offer the definitive and comprehensive standard to apply in each and every individual choice of expression. Unlike code switching, code meshing doesn't permit students to hold back their language, but permits them to bring it forward more strategically. The base idea behind code meshing is that people's so-called non-standard dialects are already fully compatible with standard English. Linguists and educational theorists have tried to make code meshing a policy for some 30 plus years. The fact that no such policy exists is not because there are no examples of code meshing or because it is unintelligible. There is no policy because it stems from and supports dominant language ideology, otherwise known as standard language ideology. Its commercial, business, and educational institutions perpetuate and perpetrate the belief that there is a single dominant race, read as white, dominant culture, read as white and upper middle class, and the way that these speakers communicate form the basis for standard modes of public expression. The gag is, this doesn't mean that white upper class people actually speak this way. It demands that we participate in a fantasy that white middle class folks are entitled speakers of public English, and we're asked to ignore those who regularly fuck up. Well, it says muck up, but I think fuck up makes more sense. And we're asked to ignore those who regularly fuck up the standard grammar, since the consequences for their illiteracy are far less severe than for those outside of the supposed dominant culture. Code switching spells failure for many students, and even worse, is covered in residue of racism. Since there's this bias towards AAVE, often people who are black or white find themselves indirectly degrading AAVE. This often happens like, you talk white. Speaking proper English isn't talking white. And that small little skit I just did there, both the people are idiots. To put a final nail in the coffin of the AAVE is just bad English debate, Jeffrey K. Pucklum makes clear in an article conveniently entitled, "African American Vernacular English is not standard English with mistakes," AAVE is no less complex or expressive than the most prestigious forms of the language. It is rule-bound and systemic. In fact, AAVE possesses at least one fine grammatical distinction which standard English completely lacks. This is the remote present perfect tense. Despite this and many other examples of systemic rulings for AAVE is still treated like bad English in the workplace and professional settings. So it's not like code switching isn't done for just no reason. It is often an attempt to avoid discrimination based on the way you speak, or discrimination based on how people perceive your intelligence for the way you speak. But on the downside, it could lead to accusations of talking white from both black and white people. And in a way, this isn't completely off, but it's still mostly bullshit. The thing about standard English is that linguists agree that it undeniably comes from the speech habits of upper to middle class whites. The call for standardizing the multiple dialects of Old and Middle English, the language of Beowulf Chaucer, came in the wake of the Industrial Revolution, the decline of feudalism and its replacement by capitalism and expanding technology. With the decline of aristocracy and the rise of the mercantile middle class, it became necessary to consider education for the masses. Technology, urbanization, mass machine production required a literate people. Mother tongue instruction, more efficient and expedient, replaced instruction in Latin, which traditionally had been used as instruction for the medium of the elite. Thus, roughly from the 16th century in the works of men like Richard Mulcaster, and especially in the 18th century in the works of men like Robert Louth, and in America in the works of men like Lindy Murray and renowned Mr. Webster, the speech of everyday people was soundly critiqued. Linguist models of correct speech were developed based on the Pax Aroma, on the speech forms of the emerging capitalist ruling class elite. Early years of this century, the American linguist Charles C. Fries set out in plain talk when he defined the standard English as the English by those who carried on the affairs of the English-speaking people. And today, those who carry on the affairs of the English-speaking people include certain high government officials whose motives are suspect. Thus, today, what passes for standard English, so-called correct English, is not what is spoken by millions of people, black or white, but what a small group of often unprincipled people speak. See, class is very important here because it wasn't the lower classes who were asked whether they wanted their language to be fucking standardized or if their language should be standardized as well. Now we deal with this expectation of this English being expected in the classroom, and now we have people who normally don't speak in this English being forced to learn it and accommodate to it, or be considered less intelligent or professional. So in comes accusations of acting or talking white, or the infamous "you speak so well." But those type of conversations have made me consider a few things. How does one act white? Just how deep does this Oreo concept go? Very deep, actually. And most importantly, what does it mean to be black? Part 2. To be black. The more the black Antillean assimilates the French language, the whiter he gets, the closer he comes to becoming a true human being. We are fully aware that this is one of man's attitudes faced with being. A man who possesses a language possesses, as an indirect consequence, the world expressed and applied by this language. Franz Fanon. Could we really discuss the complexity of assimilation without referencing Fanon? I don't think we could. So we talked about the benefits of code switching, likely easier access to professional settings, and likely to not be discriminated against for your language at least. But at what cost? It felt odd discussing code switching without also discussing the concept of the Oreo or acting white. I knew this day would come, the day for me to speak from personal experience. Let's discuss. If you haven't put it together yet, I'm not talking about the snack. Oreo is a term used to describe a black person who is white on the inside but black on the outside. The idea goes back to at least the civil rights era. The term Oreo likely wasn't used. I don't know, I wasn't there. But the idea definitely was. Broadly, I'd say it was used as a critique of how far some go to assimilate. It's discussed in Black Power by Kamwe Tore. I hope I pronounced that right. I've never heard that name pronounced, I've only read it. It's discussed in Black Power by Kamwe Tore and Charles Hamilton. In Africa, some would assimilate for social and economic mobility. There prevails in these Portuguese colonies a legal process whereby an African may become, in effect, a white man if he measures up to certain Western standards. Mulatto is one who has adopted Portuguese customs, dress, language, and has achieved at least a high school education. He is of course favored with special jobs and better housing. This status likewise qualifies him to receive passport to travel abroad, mainly to Portugal and Brazil. Otherwise, such freedom is denied. To submit all of this, the mulatto must reject his intrinsically inferior African heritage and association. Professor E. Franklin Frazier explains in his book, Franklin Frazier explains in his book, Black Bourgeois, that this happens among middle-class black Americans post and pre-Civil War. He speaks about how post and pre-Civil War many black Americans would distance themselves from their culture. This meant being not like other black people or a new Negro. It was maintained by those mulatto families that had acquired as part of their family traditions the patterns of behavior which were associated with the ideal of a Southern lady and Southern gentleman. Some families took pride in the fact that a mulatto ancestor could not be distinguished in his physical appearance, dress, manners, and speech from his white half-brother. As a rule, these families formed a close circle from which were excluded all who could not boast similar ancestry and did not conform to the same standards of morals and manners. They were exceedingly self-conscious of their culture, which consisted of enjoyment of English and Louisiana, French classical literature and music. Sometimes they maintained literary societies in which they could enjoy and foster their culture. And similarly, Torrey and Hamilton believe this happened after integration with a lot of middle-class black Americans. This black person's urge to adopt middle-class standards and values, as with the black African who had to become a Frenchman in order to be accepted. So to be an American, a black man must strive to be white. To the extent he does, he is considered well-adjusted, one who has risen above the race question. People are frequently held up by the white establishment as living examples of progress being made in society in solving the race problem. Suffice it is to say that precisely because they are required to denounce, overtly or covertly, their black race, they are reinforcing racism in this country. And this has been a large critique of integration. To achieve the American dream for many black Americans, it meant leaving behind the black community, meaning there's no efforts being made to improve the black community, but instead encouraging black people to leave it and join the white community. In a society well past separate but equal, at least on paper, workplaces are clearly more integrated than they used to be, but we still see a very specific type of diversity, one that leaves everything to do with blackness at the door. And while these workplaces are more diverse, they still remain predominantly white. And many black or non-white people find themselves on the bottom of the hierarchy or finding trouble climbing up the corporate ladder. So while these doors are more open, advancement can be difficult. And a large part of this is because employers are not only judging on race, but also racial performance. As Devin Carbata writes in his book, Acting White, the problem of race in post-brown workplaces derives not only from phenotypic manifestations or differences, it derives from performative manifestations of differences. For at least some corporations, the ideal black employee for the post-brown firm, a firm that professes a commitment to both racial equality and racial diversity, is one who is identifiably black with respect to phenotype, but unconventionally black with respect to conduct and social behavior. From the employer's perspective, this employee looks black but acts white. The basic insight that identity performance shapes racial social meaning is largely missing in contemporary theories of racial identity and anti-discrimination. We continue to treat race as though it were just a status identity with no performative dimensions. We continue to ignore how perceived racial conduct shapes current racial understandings. This is a problem. Attention to the status conduct dichotomy is necessary in today's anti-discrimination world. This dichotomy of racial performance can be interpreted by the way you speak, where you grew up, where you attend school, your name, even as simple as the clothing you wear. This clip from Mike Goodwin, a comedian, summarizes it in like the most funny way possible.
People give me a hard time because of my appearance. This is how I typically dress. People are like, Mike, why you always so dressed up? I'm like, I'm not dressed up. This is just police repellent. I'm just saying I never fit the description, you know.
But just what are the implications of that rhetoric today? Nowadays, I feel like we throw the accusation of acting white too quickly. Now, don't get me wrong, there are definitely those who shit on black culture for white coin and white acceptance, but I don't think we should call them Oreos. Is much more suitable. I'm kidding. But when aiming these labels at people who aren't actively working for white supremacy or positions of power or just like rock music, I think it can be a tad bit silly and damaging. At the end of the day, they're still black, and to call into question like blackness is some type of stamp is kind of insulting. Very insulting, actually. I've been told by both palm colors and black people that I speak or act white, and it just confuses me. Like, the people who say this expect me to, like, I don't know, fucking freestyle or something, I don't know. Especially white people, because it just, like, reveals how you think black people act. Hey, you're not like those black people I see on TV all the time. No, you're doing it wrong. You're white. Sir, this is a Wendy's. You would think in 2021 people would be smart enough to tell that this is stupid, but here we are. I could speak and act like, who's the whitest white person? John Mulaney. I could speak and act like John Mulaney, and as long as I, have melanin in my skin, I'm still fucking black. But I do find myself wondering if many of the things I've achieved in life have been given to me on proxy of me being able to speak white. Alright, we're about to get vulnerable, guys. Sometimes I find myself wondering if I've only been able to establish this YouTube thing because I speak a certain way. Part of me that worries if I didn't speak a certain way, I wouldn't be able to have, you guys. I've always talked this way for the most part, and I went to predominantly black schools, and comments about the way I talk weren't common, but they came every once in a while. But they became much more common when I went to a PWI, predominantly white institution, if you don't know what that means. I started applying places, getting interviews and whatnot, and at almost every job, either a customer, coworker, manager, or whatever, will point out how I'm so articulate or I speak so well. If you know me, I fuck up words all the time, and I just let people figure it out. But I don't do that at work because it's unprofessional. But you can't escape ignorance in America. Unfortunately, you can't escape it anywhere. Ignorance is global, I'm afraid. Saying all of this, while I do think the logic of calling someone an Oreo acting white can be damaging, it doesn't change the fact that this is a result of a post-Jim Crow America where your racial palatability matters. And the fact that people who have a more palatable racial performance are more likely to get ahead is still an issue. With assimilation or leaving the community as a key to success, we leave the black community without many resources. Only those who had the opportunity to leave could be afforded these luxuries that came in a post-brown workplace and education. But that doesn't really help the black community. You're just siphoning off the ones you deem good enough. The issue in a nutshell is helping individual black people doesn't really do much to help the masses of black people. Obviously. This is what integration gave us. Integration as a goal today speaks to the problem of blackness not only in an unrealistic way, but also a despicable way. It is based on the complete acceptance of the fact that in order to have a decent house or education, black people must move into white neighborhoods or send children to white schools. This reinforces among both black and white the idea that white is automatically superior and black is by definition inferior. For this reason, integration is a subterfuge for the maintenance of white supremacy. It allows the nation to focus on a handful of southern black children who get into white schools at a great price and to ignore the 94% who are left in impoverished all black schools. Such situations will not change until black people become equal in a way that means something. The goal is not to take black children out of the black community and expose them to the white middle class values. The goal is to build and strengthen the black community. Integrate or bust wasn't the goal, but it seems to have become the standard. As someone smart once said, if we all ain't free, none of us are free. That is the end of this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you learned something new you enjoyed, be sure to leave a comment or subscribe. So before I go, I wanted to announce that I'm changing my channel name to Philosynoir. While The Reign to Minority is catchy and fun, and we have many memories with this title, I feel like it's time for a change. But that won't be happening until next video, or maybe a little bit after that. If you enjoyed this video, again, leave a comment, tell me what you learned, tell me your favorite part, and may your vibes be chill.